Imagine, every morning, an eagle flies to you to tear out your liver again and again. But the most terrifying thing is not the pain. The most terrifying thing is to hear those for whom you went against the gods crying down on earth, and to know that it was your gift that made their lives unbearable. This is not a scene from a horror film. This is the fate of the Titan Prometheus. And today, you will learn why his story is far darker, bloodier, and more scandalous than what we were taught in school. Zeus, the vanquisher of the Titans, the new ruler of Olympus, ate his own wife to prevent the birth of the child who would overthrow him. But one day, he made a mistake, and that mistake cost him eternal fear. What is this forbidden name, for which he was willing to remove the chains from Prometheus himself? And why did the Titan prefer eternal torture to exchanging this secret for freedom? We will tell you how Zeus, with a snap of his fingers, extinguished every fire on earth and erased the very knowledge of fire from humanity. How Prometheus, deceiving the divine order, snuck into the Cyclopes' forge, thrust his hand into the primordial flame, and hid the embers in a fennel stalk. And why, for this night, filled with Athena's whispers and footsteps that made Olympus tremble, the world paid with millennia of suffering. The peace that reigned on Olympus was deceptive. Outwardly, it shone with splendor and tranquility. The echoes of the great war of the Titans had faded, and it seemed that a tyrant's hand would never again darken our existence. But I, Prometheus, the Titan of foresight, saw the cracks in this shining facade. Zeus, our new ruler, whom I had once supported against my own kin, increasingly gave me cause for doubt. His power seemed to intoxicate him, and the ghost of his first wife, Metis, whom he had swallowed to save his throne, stood before my eyes. In her loss, I saw a reflection of my own family's fate. I remembered my father, Iapetus, a stubborn and unyielding Titan, and my brothers, the reckless Menoetius and the mighty Atlas. Their screams still echoed in my memory as their physical forms dissolved, leaving only a final, desperate glimmer of their souls before sinking into the darkness of Tartarus. If only they had listened to me, to the voice of reason, but their pride was deaf. However, those are matters of bygone days, and my gaze is always fixed on the future. The new harmony at court was largely maintained by Athena, the newborn daughter of Zeus, who had emerged from his head. She was a great artisan of persuasion. With her presence and wise speeches, she soothed the gods, and peace was restored. However, my personal fears did not dissipate. Therefore, when Zeus summoned me and my brother Epimetheus, a chill stirred in my soul. But this time, nothing sinister happened. On the contrary, the ruler greeted us with a broad smile, shook our hands, and led us to a huge balcony overlooking the vast lands at the foot of Olympus. The earth was beautiful, but desolate and lifeless, and we gods, admittedly, were beginning to grow bored. And so, in recognition of our loyalty in the war, Zeus entrusted us with a great task: to populate this world with life, to create all the beings that would walk the earth, with the exception of the sea dwellers, for that was the domain of the children of Pontus and Thalassa. What an honor! At last, a challenge worthy of our minds and hearts. My brother and I eagerly set off for the great forges of Olympus. With the help of the Cyclopes, we gathered the necessary tools and materials and descended to the earth, to the place that was to become home for our future creations. We gathered clay from different corners of the world and mixed it with the waters of rivers and oceans. I sat amidst these raw materials and plunged into deep thought. In my mind, as if on blueprints, images of future species, their needs, their destinies, arose. I, Prometheus, the titan of foresight, saw their future and had to create them perfect and well adapted. But my brother, my dear, impetuous Epimetheus, whose gift was also his curse, to think only after the deed was done, could not wait. He threw himself into the work with a feverish haste, not pausing for a moment to reflect. He grabbed the divine gifts we had brought with us from a casket and distributed them thoughtlessly. He sculpted lions, endowing them not only with sharp claws and fangs, but also with magnificent manes for warmth and incredible speed that could have been useful to others. He gave elephants immense strength and size, but in addition, strong tusks and a long memory. He gifted birds with beautiful songs, bright plumage, and the ability to fly, 3 great gifts to one species. Lizards received the ability of regeneration and the skill to change their skin color. He worked day and night, as if in a fever, creating hundreds, thousands of animals, insects, reptiles, and mammals. At times, in his haste, he made mistakes, leaving some species almost defenseless, and then he would immediately try to fix it by taking gifts away from creatures yet to be created. All this time, I sat in the silence of my workshop, engrossed in the idea of creating the pinnacle of creation. I did not interfere with my brother until one day he knocked on my door, interrupting my thoughts. He could not look me in the eye. His hands were trembling. He led me to his workshop, and there, on his workbench, I saw it. The casket where all our gifts were kept. It was empty, absolutely empty, and I had not even begun to work on my main creation, man. Rage boiled within me. I was ready to strike him for this thoughtless squandering, for his eternal lack of foresight, which had once again put us both in a bind. But I restrained myself. Deep down, I understood that I should have foreseen this. I knew my brother. Perhaps that is why I did not raise a hand against him. I had been too absorbed in the idea of perfection to stop him, while he wasted everything to the last crumb. Returning to my workshop, I channeled all my anger into my work. I mixed water and clay, took a moist, pliable lump in my hands, and began to sculpt. I was not just creating a form. I saw it, my creation, not only in my mind, but in the clay itself. I carved away the excess, smoothed and refined the details. First, I created the bones, each one separately, but in such a way that together they formed a single, perfect skeleton. Then I began to apply muscles, layer by layer, shaping the body and giving it form. I sculpted the internal organs, laid out a network of blood vessels and nerves, and placed within the skull the most complex mechanism, the brain. And when I stretched the thin, delicate skin over it, concealing all my painstaking work, they became beautiful, of different shapes, shades, and features. Each one was like a son to me. In the faces of these creations, I unwittingly reflected the features of my lost family, something of my father, something of my brothers, and even a part of myself. They lay in my workshop, naked, without claws or fangs, completely defenseless. And yet, they already seemed alive to me. The only gift I could give them was borrowed from us, the gods. I gave them our image, the ability to walk on 2 legs, to hold their back straight, and to look at the sky, not the ground. I gave them the ability to think and reason like us, though not as perfectly, for they were merely clay and water, while we were of divine essence. But this was not enough. I sat and looked at these defenseless bodies that would soon be mortal, and I felt my own inadequacy. How would they survive in a world filled with my brother's creations? The idea came to me suddenly as the sun's rays touched my neck. Fire. But this gift would have to wait. First, they had to be brought to life. When we stood before Zeus, he announced that his daughter Athena would help us complete the project by breathing life into the creations. Before this event, a week-long feast was appointed in honor of the new world, during which a key event was to take place: the sacrifice of a great bull. The part of the bull chosen by the gods would henceforth and forever become a sacred offering to us. Athena descended to earth with us. She studied Epimetheus's creatures with interest and then came to my workshop. The sun was setting when she looked at the humans. "They are the strangest of all, Prometheus," she said. "They walk like us, they think like us, but they are so vulnerable. Why did you make them this way?" "Perhaps," I replied, "but I will not leave them defenseless. With the skills I have given them, and with one final gift they will receive, I believe they will not just survive, but thrive." She nodded and, approaching the first clay man, took a deep breath. Her breath, filled with the essence of life, entered the statue, and I heard a heart begin to beat. The skin gained color, blood ran through the vessels, and the first creation opened its eyes. He was alive. By the time of the feast, humans had already spread across the earth, and they were thriving. For I had taught them what I had been thinking of on that sunny day. I gave them fire. With it, they could see in the dark, hunt large beasts, and cook their food. Against all odds, my creations were prevailing over those of Epimetheus. I was proud. The great feast gathered all the gods on earth in a place called Mycone. Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Hestia, Demeter, all sat at a huge table laden with the delicacies of the new world. And then the hour of sacrifice came. I felt a chill run down my neck. Before me stood 2 portions of the bull. I had prepared them myself. In one, I had placed all the best, juiciest cuts of meat, but I covered them with the unappetizing, tough stomach of the bull. In the other, I put all the bones, and on top, I covered them with a thick layer of glistening, appetizing-looking fat. Zeus, wanting the best for the gods, did not hesitate to choose the larger portion, gleaming with fat. But when he took a bite, his teeth crunched on bare bones. At that moment, I pulled the hide off the other portion, revealing the succulent meat to all, and passed it to the humans. Zeus's eyes flashed with a fury that could incinerate. He drained his cup of ambrosia, and in the ensuing silence, his voice sounded deceptively calm. "What a funny joke, Prometheus, and what love you have for your little clay men. Well, since your trick was so witty, I will not change the rules. Let it be as you wish. The gods will receive fat and bones, and your people the best meat." He paused, his smile not softening the coldness in his eyes. "But I have one question." He casually raised his hand and snapped his fingers. At that same instant, a quiet wind swept across the world, and every bonfire, every hearth, every torch on earth was extinguished. What will they cook it with now that they have no fire? I looked into their minds and realized with horror. Zeus had not just extinguished the flames, he had erased the very knowledge of fire from every human's memory. The punishment was not just cruel, it was sophisticated. To deprive my creations of fire meant to cast them back into darkness and cold, to condemn them to eternal fear of nocturnal predators, of the fangs and claws with which my brother had so generously endowed his beasts. While the other gods returned to the shining Olympus, Epimetheus and I remained on earth. But while my brother could find solace in observing his colorful creations, I could find no peace. A week had passed since that fateful feast, and I had not slept a wink. I sat on a hilltop and watched as my people, my children, shivered from the cold in damp caves, as they fled from the slightest rustle, as they starved, unable to overcome large game or make the tough flesh edible. Every one of their pains resonated in me as physical suffering. I had tried to save them, to give them an advantage, but in the end, I had only put them in harm's way, made them even more vulnerable. They were paying for my pride, for my attempt to outwit Zeus himself. Their potential, which I had seen so clearly, was stifled in its infancy. And with each day of my sleepless vigil, my anger at the ruler of Olympus grew. Who was he to decide their fate? Who was he to restrain their development, just to soothe his wounded ego? His own rule was built on deceit and violence. Who was he to judge my people? I could not accept his command. I could not. And so, watching my suffering creations, I began to devise a plan. I waited, studying not only the earth, but also the heavens above Olympus. And fate was on my side. One night, the mighty Zeus left his palace, transformed into an eagle, and flew off into the darkness on some business of his own. This was my chance. Using my divine power, I bent the light around myself, becoming practically invisible to a casual glance. Of course, any god who looked closely could have noticed me, but I was not trying to deceive the gods. They were not expecting me that night. Ascending Mount Olympus was ridiculously easy. I knew every stone here. The path to the great forge, the workshop of the Cyclopes, was familiar to me. One day, Hephaestus would rule here, but he was not yet born. But now, in the depths of the halls, the mighty one-eyed giant slept, and the corridors were empty. The divine flame, eternally burning in the forge, illuminated the room with a warm, soft light. It danced, its tongues mesmerizing in the semi-darkness. Zeus had erased the knowledge of fire from human memory, but this flame was different. This was a sacred, primordial flame. Ordinary fire would not have helped. They needed the idea itself, the very essence of fire returned to them. The king had forbidden giving it to mortals, but at that moment I did not care. I stepped toward the forge and, without hesitation, reached my hand into its very heart. The flame licked my skin, hissed, but I felt no pain. Grabbing a few smoldering embers, I quickly hid them in a hollow fennel stalk I had brought with me and sealed it with the power of my will, so the embers would not go out, but also not burn through the stalk. At that moment, the door behind me closed with a soft click. I spun around, hiding the stalk behind my back. In the doorway stood Athena. "You should not be here, Prometheus," she said calmly. "And why is that?" I replied, trying to seem nonchalant. "This is a workshop, and I am a creator. It seems to me the most fitting place for me." "Do not take me for a fool." Her voice became sterner. "I know what you have stolen." I was silent. "Then hear me out," I said at last. "You care for them too. I know you see. You are not foolish, Athena, and you know this is wrong. It is unjust." She was silent, but did not move, did not try to stop me or take my burden. They are down there, alone, freezing, starving, defenseless. They are eating raw flesh. You know that not helping them is wrong. "I cannot help you," she said softly. "I am not asking you to. Just do not stand in my way. Give me one night, and I will face any consequences alone. No one will ever know you were here." She looked at me for a long moment. Then, without a word, she stepped aside, opened the door, and left it ajar. I did not delay, accepting her silent gift, and rushed from the mountain as fast as I could. That night, I traversed the entire earth. I found the caves where my naked creations huddled together, shivering from the cold, and I lit fires for them, one after another, using the embers from the hollow stalk, the embers of the great fire of the gods. By dawn, the world was once again illuminated by the light of bonfires. Foresight is both a gift and a curse. I knew what consequences awaited me. I saw them as clearly as I saw the rising sun. Therefore, before the inevitable, I went to my brother. "Epimetheus," I said, waking him, "listen to me carefully. If the gods from Olympus come to you with gifts, do not accept them. Take nothing from them. They will want to trap you, dear brother. Do not let them. Look after humanity, protect them, and look after my wife and son. Be happy and take care of yourself." He, sleepy and still consumed by his eternal regrets, asked me some questions, but I only hugged him goodbye and went to my workshop. I already knew who would be waiting for me there. At the entrance stood them, my former allies in the war, and now the loyal henchmen of Zeus, Kratos, and Bia. In their hands, heavy adamantine chains gleamed dully. Meanwhile, Zeus, transformed into an eagle, soared high above the clouds. He was tormented not so much by Prometheus's antics as by recurring nightmares, far more ominous than those that had plagued him before Athena's birth. He had overcome one prophecy, but that was not enough. The sense of impending doom was like a splinter lodged deep inside him. To get rid of it, he flew to seek counsel from his grandmother, Gaia. Her cave, where he had hidden in his youth, had always been a source of wisdom for him. Now that the earth was filled with life, it was one of the few places where he could be alone. He descended to the entrance, hidden from all eyes. "Grandmother," he called, his voice echoing through the stone vaults. "I seek your answers. The prophecy my father spoke of, and his father before him, that a child born of a union with a certain goddess will surpass me and take my throne. I must know who she is, who will bear this child." He waited, but in response, there was only silence, broken by the rare drops of water falling somewhere in the depths of the cave. He repeated his question, louder, more insistently, almost pleading, but Gaia remained silent. He could have forced her to speak, using his power, but he did not. If she did not want to speak, it meant she still had not forgiven him for the story with Metis. Annoyed, he left the cave. There were other seers. He would find answers. He flew back toward Olympus, lost in thought, and so he did not immediately notice what was happening below. Only when thick plumes of black smoke enveloped him did he awaken from his reverie. Breaking through the smoky veil, he saw a terrifying picture. Half the forests on earth were engulfed in roaring flames. The fire, like a giant blood-red monster, was devouring the flesh of his grandmother Earth. He could hear the dryads, the spirits of the trees, screaming in agony as they burned alive along with their homes. And then he saw them. Two groups of naked apes, clay people, these parodies of gods. They were waving torches made from our divine flame, and all living things fled from them in fear. In that moment, his blood boiled. He realized whose handiwork this was. Prometheus. He thinks I am cruel and petty, but he does not see the risk. He does not understand that you cannot give such power to those who are incapable of controlling it. My worst fears were confirmed. They are not us, and they never will be. They will destroy each other, destroy other creatures, destroy the earth itself. Zeus took a deep breath and exhaled a hurricane wind, driving the clouds together. A torrential rain fell upon the burning forests, turning the flames into hissing embers and ash. And he himself flew to Olympus, a plan for punishment forming in his mind. And the punishment for humanity is only the beginning. The punishment for the one who loves them so will be far more terrible. The rage that seethed in Zeus was cold and calculating. He saw not just an act of defiance, but a threat to the universal order he had so carefully constructed. Prometheus, his former ally, had placed his personal feelings for a handful of clay creations above the balance of the entire cosmos. Zeus could have incinerated humanity with a single lightning bolt, but that would have been too simple, too quick. Prometheus's pain had to be long, and the lesson for all the other gods vivid. What if Poseidon, who had once coveted his throne, decided that insubordination goes unpunished? No, the example had to be demonstrative. He allowed Prometheus to enjoy his victory for a time, to help his filthy little humans, as he called them in his mind. He allowed them to keep the best cuts of meat, but the defiance with fire was the last straw. When Kratos and Bia dragged the chained Prometheus into the throne room, Zeus sat on his throne, outwardly calm, but a storm raged within him. He could have sent him after the other titans, into the bottomless abyss of Tartarus. But then a quiet voice echoed in his head, the voice of Athena, pleading for mercy. And then an idea came to him, a way to kill two birds with one stone. He would give Prometheus a chance to save himself, and at the same time help Zeus rid himself of his greatest fear. Prometheus, Zeus began, his voice booming through the hall. You have disobeyed me, your king, your ruler. You have turned your back on us, on your divine family, for the sake of creations made of mud. You have upset the balance of the universe. Why? Answer me. Prometheus raised his head. His eyes were cold as ice, his face an impenetrable mask. I did it because it is right, because it is just. Humans need fire to survive, and you know that as well as I do. Now, convene your court, O my king, and let's get this over with. Right? Just? Metal entered Zeus's voice. You have taken justice away from all the other creatures that are not your favorites, you fool. But before I pass judgment, I have a proposition for you. And if I were you, I would not refuse it. An act of this magnitude cannot go unpunished. I know you are plagued by a prophecy that haunts you. I have seen it, and I know the answer you seek, but I will not give it to you. I know what you wish to ask, my lord, Prometheus interrupted him, and I know the answer, but I will not tell you. What I did for man was right, even if you do not understand it. I accept any punishment you decree. But know this, Zeus, this is not the end. Not for me, nor for humanity. One day, I will stand before you again. Zeus's jaw clenched. He took a deep breath, and his anger gave way to an icy disappointment. He had given him a chance. Before the entire court, he had offered him a way out, but Prometheus had rejected it. Zeus had no choice. If he forgave such blatant insubordination, his power would be shaken. He summoned the entire court. The hall filled with gods and goddesses, their whispers about Prometheus's deeds, the damage from the fires, and the strange progress the naked apes had already made, buzzing like a disturbed hive. Zeus stood, and silence fell. All present know of the crime committed last night, his voice thundered. With a heavy heart, I, Zeus, ruler of Olympus, declare Prometheus a deceiver and a traitor. He has violated my direct command, preserving the knowledge of fire for humans. He has neglected his divine duties in favor of mortals. In your blind love for them, you have condemned all other living beings on earth to suffering, for now your precious humans dominate them. You have placed a weapon in their hands, fearing not the wrath of your king and this court. Gods and goddesses, I offered our Prometheus a pardon, mercy, even forgiveness, but he threw this gift back in my face. It pains me to do my duty, but it must be done. Prometheus, for your disloyalty and betrayal, you shall be exiled from this court forever. You will be chained to the Caucasus Mountains. You will have no rest, no sleep, not a moment of peace. You will spend eternity staring at bare rocks, and only pain will be your eternal companion. Kratos, Baia, take him from my sight. All are dismissed. As Kratos and Baia dragged Prometheus from the hall, Zeus sank onto his throne. The crowd of gods slowly dispersed, and among them he noticed the eyes of the Oceanid Pronoia, Prometheus's wife, who was holding a small boy, their son, tightly by the hand. They quickly blended into the crowd and disappeared. When the hall was empty, Zeus turned to other seers, the Titanesses, Phoebe and Asteria, but they could not help him. They saw the prophecy, saw the coming doom, but the name of the future child's mother was hidden from them by a mist. Zeus was out of options. Then he closed his eyes and looked upon the world through the eyes of his eagle soaring high above the Caucasus Mountains. There, on the summit of a cliff, he saw him, Prometheus, crucified with adamantine chains. The eagle folded its wings and plummeted like a stone. Its talons sank into the flesh of the Titan's abdomen. Prometheus screamed, howled in pain as the eagle began to tear at his body, pulling out chunks of flesh and blood. The beast savaged his skin, his muscles reaching for his entrails. Zeus felt Prometheus begin to beg for mercy as the eagle's beak touched his liver. It tasted like rusted iron. The bird pecked and tore at his organ as if it were the greatest delicacy. But it did not matter. By morning, the liver would grow back, only to be eaten again, and again, and again. Zeus snapped back into his own body. He walked to the balcony and looked toward the horizon, in the direction of his former friend's mountain prison. He was in pain. Prometheus had been one of the first Titans to believe in him. How could he have so easily turned his back on them, on him? At that moment, his gaze was distracted by thin streams of smoke rising from the earth. His naked apes had come out of their caves and were beginning to build huts, gathering into settlements. Now that Prometheus was dealt with, he could devise a torture worthy of them, a perfect punishment, and it would begin with a single gift and a single sealed casket. But that, as they say, is another story. Prometheus's torture was merely a prelude. Zeus understood that physical pain, even if eternal, would not break the spirit of the Titan of foresight. The true punishment had to strike at the very heart, at what Prometheus valued most, at his creations. The direct annihilation of humanity would have been too crude and would not have brought Zeus the satisfaction he craved. No, his revenge had to be as subtle as a spider's web and as inevitable as fate. the humans had received fire, but with it, pride was born in their hearts, a spark of the divine flame that could flare into a blaze of defiance. This spark needed not to be extinguished, but redirected to make them destroy themselves. He summoned Hephaestus, the lame blacksmith god, the unparalleled master. "Create for me something perfect," Zeus commanded. "Take the finest clay and the purest water and sculpt a woman. Let her beauty be such that neither god nor mortal can resist." Hephaestus set to work, and under his skilled hands a miracle was born. When the clay body was ready, Zeus summoned the other gods. Each was to contribute to this perfect instrument of vengeance. Athena, despite her silent sympathy for Prometheus, did not dare to disobey her father and endowed the creation with skill in weaving and needlework. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, gifted her with irresistible charm and burning desire. The Charites crowned her with garlands of flowers, and the Horae adorned her with gold. But the most cunning gifts were bestowed by Hermes, the messenger of the gods and patron of liars. He placed in her breast a deceitful mind, a curiosity that knows no bounds, and words as sweet as honey but concealing poison. Zeus named her Pandora, the all-gifted. Then he ordered a large clay vessel, a pythos, to be brought, tightly sealed. What was inside, no one knew but him. "Hermes," said Zeus, "you will take this woman and this vessel to the earth, and you will give them as a gift to none other than Epimetheus, the brother of our rebel." Zeus knew the character of the Titan who thinks after. He was kind, but weak and trusting. He was the complete opposite of his far-sighted brother. It was this weakness that was to be the key to opening the container of woes. Hermes, without asking questions, took Pandora by the hand and led her down to the world of mortals. Epimetheus lived in seclusion, still mourning his brother's departure and trying to look after humanity, as he had promised. He saw them building, creating, how the flame of their fires warmed their nights, and he felt a mixture of pride and longing. And then one day, the radiant Hermes appeared before his dwelling, and next to him stood a woman of such unearthly beauty that Epimetheus was momentarily speechless. "Greetings, Titan," Hermes said. "The great Zeus sends you his gift as a sign of reconciliation. He forgives your kin their past offenses and desires peace. Accept this woman, Pandora, and this vessel as a pledge of his goodwill." In Epimetheus's mind, Prometheus's last words echoed, "Do not accept gifts from the Olympians." The warning was clear and unambiguous. He remembered it. But before him stood the living embodiment of perfection. Her eyes looked at him with such innocence, her smile was so pure, that all suspicion melted like wax near a flame. Could Zeus be so treacherous? Perhaps he had truly decided to make peace. Epimetheus looked at the vessel. It was simple and unremarkable. What harm could there be in a clay pot? His heart, ever open to goodness and beauty, could not resist. He forgot his brother's warning. His nature, his essence of thinking after, took over. He smiled gratefully at Hermes, welcomed Pandora into his home, and placed the mysterious vessel in a corner, resolving never to open it. But he did not know that the seed of disaster had already been planted, not in the vessel, but in the heart of the woman he had just let into his life. And that seed had already begun to sprout. Curiosity, the gift of Hermes, whispered to Pandora day and night, drawing her gaze to the sealed lid, promising unknown secrets and wonders. The question was not if she would open it, But when? With Pandora's arrival, Epimetheus's life was transformed. The emptiness left by his brother's departure was filled with her laughter and beauty. He was happier than he had ever been, and almost believed that the golden age that had begun with the creation of the world would last forever. He showed her all the wonders of the earth, the flowering meadows, the swift rivers, the mountains that reached the sky. The people welcomed her with delight, seeing in her a gift from the gods, a sign of their favor. But while Epimetheus enjoyed his happiness, an unquenchable thirst grew and strengthened in Pandora's soul. The gift of Hermes, curiosity, proved stronger than all the others. By day she smiled and did the needlework Athena had taught her, but at night, when Epimetheus slept, she would approach the mysterious Pythos standing in the corner. The vessel beckoned to her. It was warm to the touch, and it seemed to her that quiet, indistinct whispers, promises, and pleas emanated from within. She ran her fingers over the clay lid, over the wax seal bearing the imprint of Zeus's lightning bolt. What could be inside? What treasures or secrets did the great ruler of Olympus hide in this simple clay pot? Thoughts swirled in her head, giving her no peace. Perhaps it contained the wisdom of the ages, recipes for eternal youth, or unseen jewels. With each passing day, this desire became unbearable, turning into a true obsession. One day, when Epimetheus had gone far into the woods, Pandora could bear it no longer. She approached the vessel, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she was doing wrong, that she was breaking a taboo, but she could not stop herself. With trembling hands, she picked at the wax seal. There was a soft crack. For a moment she hesitated, but then, gathering all her resolve, she lifted the heavy lid ever so slightly, just a crack, to peek inside. In that instant, what burst from the vessel was not the light of treasure, but something dark, formless, like a swarm of black moths. It was all the woes and misfortunes that humanity had never known. Sickness that contorts the body in agony, old age that withers the flesh and clouds the mind, exhausting toil that bends the back, envy that poisons the soul, hatred that drives brother against brother, hunger that twists the gut, pain, lies, despair. They flew out with a buzz and a hiss, invisible but tangible, and instantly scattered across the world, entering the homes and hearts of people. Men and women who had lived as carefree as gods suddenly felt their first pain. Children cried for the first time, not from hunger, but from hurt. Friendship was replaced by suspicion, love by jealousy. The golden age of humanity ended in an instant. Horrified by what she had done, Pandora slammed the lid shut with all her might. There was a dull thud, but it was too late. Almost all the woes had managed to escape. When the deafening noise in her head subsided, she heard from under the lid a quiet, thin voice, like the ringing of a silver bell. It begged to be let out. Frightened, but no longer able to resist, Pandora once again lifted the lid. What fluttered out of the vessel was not a dark shadow, but something bright and trembling, like a pale butterfly with luminous wings. It was Elpis, the last of the spirits trapped in the Pythos. Hope. She did not fly away, but circled above the head of the weeping Pandora, drying her tears with her gentle radiance, and then slowly flew across the world, following the swarm of misfortunes. When Epimetheus returned, he found a completely different world. He saw people quarreling over food, old men bent under the weight of years, diseases taking lives. He saw a weeping Pandora next to the open vessel and understood everything. His gift, to think after, had manifested in all its tragic fullness. Anger and despair seized him, but looking at his sobbing wife, he could not curse her. He only sat down beside her and wept too, mourning not only the lost paradise, but also the naivety that had led to this catastrophe. From then on, human life became a struggle. Every day brought them suffering and trials. But even in the most profound darkness, when it seemed all was lost, a small, bright spark flickered in their hearts. Hope. It did not relieve the pain, but it gave them the strength to endure. It did not cancel out the hardships, but it whispered that after the darkest night, the dawn always comes. And this bittersweet existence, full of suffering and hope, became the new lot of humanity. And this new world was watched by two beings, one with cold satisfaction from his throne on Olympus, the other with infinite agony from his rock in the Caucasus. On Olympus, satisfaction reigned. From the height of his throne, Zeus observed the world he had so artfully corrected. His revenge was complete, and it was perfect. He had not just punished humans, he had changed their very nature. Now they were preoccupied with their petty squabbles, their struggle for survival, treating diseases and mourning losses. They no longer had the time or the strength to challenge the gods. Their pride, ignited by Prometheus's fire, was humbled by the torrent of suffering released from Pandora's vessel. For Zeus, this was not an act of cruelty. It was a necessary surgical operation to restore the universal order. He saw their tears and heard their groans, but he considered it a fair price for the audacity of their creator and their own recklessness. The balance was restored. Mortals had taken their place, below in mud and suffering, while the gods were above in eternal radiance. He saw hope like a will-o'-the-wisp flitting among the people, and it even amused him. Let them hope. Hope would not change their fate, but it would make them submissive. Very different feelings were experienced by the one chained to the summit of the world. Prometheus could not see what was happening below, but he was bound to his creations by invisible ties. He felt them. Every new disease that afflicted a human body echoed in him as a bout of fever. Every flash of hatred between people burned him from the inside with acid. Every death from starvation or illness was like a new lightning strike to him. This torment was incomparably worse than the daily visits of the eagle. The beast's claws and beak tore only his flesh, which could regenerate. But the suffering of humanity tore at his soul, his immortal essence, and these wounds did not heal. He had given them fire so they could thrive, build, create, to lift them from the darkness. And in the end, his gift, indirectly, through Zeus's anger, led to the greatest curse. He wanted to make them like gods, but he had made them the most wretched of all living beings. The realization of this was his main, his endless torture. He was the titan of foresight, but he could not foresee this outcome, or did not want to. Now, in his eternal agony, he replayed the chain of events over and over in his mind, searching for his mistake. Was it in the trick with the bull, in the theft of fire, or was the very first fatal mistake to create beings capable of feeling and suffering at all? He hung between heaven and earth, a perfect symbol of tragedy, a creator tormented by the pain of his creation. Zeus triumphed. Prometheus was broken. It seemed the story was over, and the status quo would last for eternity. But Zeus, in his triumph, had forgotten one thing: the prophecy. The secret of his own downfall was still locked in the mind of the chained titan. And this secret was the only thing Prometheus had left. His knowledge was his last weapon, the last thread connecting him to the future. Centuries passed. The world changed. Prometheus's agony became a familiar, almost background music to his existence. But one day, in a moment when the pain from the eagle's claws and the pain of humanity merged into an unbearable flash, his gift of foresight broke through the veil of suffering. It was not just a premonition, but a clear, distinct vision. He saw something new, a glimmer in the distant future. He saw a hero, a mighty warrior wandering the earth, performing unheard-of feats. He saw this hero, a descendant of Zeus himself, climbing his rock. He saw the string of a great bow being drawn, and an arrow, released by a mighty hand, flying not at a monster, but straight into the heart of the eagle tormenting his flesh. He felt the arrow pierce the bird, and for the first time in countless years, he felt not pain, but relief. This vision changed everything. It did not end his suffering, but it filled it with meaning. His torture was no longer meaningless and endless. It had an end, and so his silence also acquired a new value. He would wait. He would endure. His knowledge of Zeus's fate was not just a way to take revenge. It was his bargaining chip, the key to his own liberation. The irony of fate was that Zeus, in his quest to secure his throne and punish the defiant, would, without knowing it, father the one who would disrupt his plans and become an instrument in the hands of fate. The stalemate between him and Prometheus would be resolved not by a god and not by a titan, but by a demigod, a bridge between the world of gods and the world of humans, which he, Prometheus, had so desperately tried to build. The confrontation was not over. It had only entered a new, decisive phase, and Prometheus was prepared to wait. Eras followed one another like pages in a book that no one read. Humanity, the child of my mind and my pain, survived. Guided by the flickering light of Olympus, it learned not just to exist, but to live in the new cruel world. The golden age of carefree existence was lost to Lethe, and in its place came an age of labor and sorrow, but also an age of resilience. People learned to sow and reap, shedding sweat on the earth that no longer gave them fruit without effort. They learned to build houses of stone and wood to shelter from the weather and predators, which now seemed the lesser of evils. They created laws to restrain the hatred and envy released from Pandora's vessel, though this struggle rarely ended in complete victory. They came to know the bitterness of loss, seeing their loved ones off to the misty realm of Hades, and this bitterness made them deeper, and their joys sharper, and most importantly, they remembered. Memory became their greatest treasure and their main weapon against despair. From mouth to mouth, stories were passed down about the creation of the world, about the carefree life interrupted by a woman's curiosity and the wrath of the gods. And among these stories, the most sacred was the legend of the Titan advocate. They did not know all the subtleties of the court intrigues of Olympus, but they knew the main thing. One of the immortals had sacrificed himself for them. He gave them the fire that warmed their homes, cooked their food, and drove away the darkness. He taught them to think and to create, and for this gift, he was chained to a rock at the edge of the world, where eternal torture became his lot. My name became for them a symbol not only of suffering, but of defiance, a symbol of the sacrificial love of a creator for his creation. In their songs and poems, they celebrated me, and every time a person lit a hearth, they unconsciously paid tribute to my sacrifice. This memory, this gratitude, seeped through the layers of earth and stone, reaching me on my summit of torment, and was the only balm for my tormented soul. On my rock, time stood still. Each day was an exact copy of the one before. The dawn brought not hope, but only a short respite, while my flesh, torn the day before, fully regenerated. Then a dark dot would appear on the horizon. It grew, transforming into the familiar silhouette of the eagle, Zeus's messenger. The bird never hurried. It would circle above me, its cold, ruthless eyes looking at me, as if assessing the quality of its future meal. Then came the swift dive, the strike of talons tearing skin and muscle, and the sharp, all-consuming pain as its beak plunged into my liver. And so it went, day after day, century after century. Pain became my air, a scream, my speech. But the physical agony was only part of the torture. Far more terrifying was what I felt. I was connected to humanity, and their suffering flowed into me in a continuous stream. I felt the fever of a sick child in Athens, the despair of a farmer whose crops were ruined by drought in Mesopotamia, the grief of a mother who lost her son in a senseless skirmish somewhere in the north. Their pain became my pain, and this endless river of human suffering was far more torturous than the eagle's beak. But in this abyss of despair, in this ocean of pain, my gift of foresight, which had seemed to have abandoned me, one day broke through. It happened at a moment when the physical and spiritual torment reached their peak. The world around me disappeared, replaced by a bright, dazzling picture from the future. I saw a sun-drenched road, along which walked a warrior of unseen strength and stature. A huge club rested on his shoulder, and a bow was slung across his back. He was a mortal, but in his veins flowed the blood of Zeus himself. I saw him performing feats unthinkable for an ordinary man, cleansing the earth of monsters born of darkness. And then his path led him to my rock. He looked at me, and in his eyes there was neither fear nor revulsion, but only a stern compassion. He said not a word. He simply took the huge bow from his shoulder, fitted an arrow to it, and drew the string so tight that the wood creaked. I heard the whistle of air as the arrow cut through space. It struck the eagle at the very moment it was about to deliver another blow. A death cry rang out, and the bird that had been my executioner for millennia plummeted like a stone into the abyss. Then the hero came closer and, with one mighty effort, shattered the adamantine chains that bound me. The vision vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The eagle continued to tear at my flesh, but something had changed. The pain remained, but the despair was gone. My suffering had found a purpose. My infinite patience ceased to be passive and became an active waiting. I understood that my knowledge of Zeus's fate was not just a secret. It was my key to freedom, and this key would be brought to me by none other than the son of my enemy. The irony of fate was truly divine. Zeus, in his eternal pursuit of power and security, would himself create the hero who would defy his will and put an end to my torture. My silence became my main strength. I was no longer just a victim. I was a player in a long cosmic game. And on Olympus, Zeus found no peace. He had won. He had established his order. But the shadow of the prophecy continued to hang over him. He became obsessed with control. He constantly monitored the mortal world, interfering in their affairs, directing the course of history, starting and stopping wars. His numerous unions with mortal women were not only a manifestation of his insatiable nature, but also a subconscious attempt to control fate, to father all possible heroes himself, so that none of them could become a threat. But the more children he had, the stronger his fear became. Which of them was the one? Which of his lovers carried his doom in her womb? He sought answers from oracles, but they gave only vague hints. He tried to learn the secret from other gods, but no one knew it. The key was only with me, and he knew it. Sometimes he would look towards the Caucasus, and I could feel his gaze. He was waiting for me to break, for me to beg for mercy and trade my secret for an end to the torture. But now, after my vision, he would never get it. Thus, a new balance of power was established. At the top of the world, in agony but with hope in my heart, I awaited my hour, the keeper of the secret. On Olympus, in luxury but with eternal fear in his soul, ruled Zeus, the unwitting architect of his own future crisis. And on earth, amid suffering and struggle, a people grew who remembered their advocate, and somewhere among them, the hero destined to be the decisive figure in this eternal game was already taking his first steps. The confrontation was not over. It lay in wait, preparing for a new, final act. And I was prepared to wait, no matter how many centuries it took. Eternity, for an immortal, is a relative concept. But my eternity, chained to the icy peak of the Caucasus, was absolute. It was measured not by the changing of seasons, which I no longer felt, but by the cycles of pain and regeneration. The world below lived its own life. I felt empires rise and fall, languages be born and die, human thought, like the fire I had given them, sometimes blaze brightly with philosophy and art, and sometimes smolder in ages of ignorance and war. And on Olympus, a cold war raged, a silent duel between omnipotence and omniscience. And the battlefield was my tormented body and my unbending spirit. Zeus could not simply wait. His paranoia, fueled by my silence, grew with each century. He could not accept that the key to his future was in the hands of his greatest enemy. He began to act, but not with brute force. He had already applied that in full. He decided to use diplomacy, temptation, and for this mission, there was no one better than Hermes, the messenger god, whose words were as slippery as snakes and as persuasive as gold. One day, through the haze of pain, I heard not only the whistle of the wind, but also the rustle of winged sandals. Hermes stood before me, radiant and immaculate, a stark contrast to my bloodied, emaciated figure. He showed neither pity nor contempt, only businesslike concern. "Greetings, son of Iapetus," he began, his voice soft and insinuating. "I come not as an enemy, but as the voice of reason. Father Zeus, in his magnanimity, is prepared to reconsider your fate. He sees your long suffering and is ready to put an end to it." I remained silent, looking at him through my tangled, frozen hair. My silence was an answer he did not want to accept. "Think, Prometheus," he continued, taking a step closer. "What is the point of this senseless endurance? You suffer for a race of beings whose lives are shorter than a single breath of an immortal. They are born, they breed in filth, they suffer, and they disappear. And you, one of the mighty Titans, rot here for them. Is that reasonable? Zeus asks for little. Just one name, the name of the one whose son will be a threat to him. Name her, and these chains will fall. You will return to Olympus. Your honor and your place among us will be restored. You will be a creator again, not a victim. His words were logical. They appealed to selfishness, to the instinct for self-preservation that any living being should possess. But something in me had died and been reborn on that rock. I chuckled, and the sound was like the scraping of stones. "You call this suffering, Hermes?" I rasped, my voice unaccustomed to speech. "This is not suffering. This is a monument to a choice that you Olympians are afraid to make. You speak of honor. What honor is there in serving a tyrant out of fear? Your freedom on Olympus is a gilded cage where you tremble at every roll of his thunder. My chains are the sign of my true freedom, the freedom not to submit to injustice." "You speak of humans," I continued, and my voice grew stronger. "You see only their short lives, but I see their infinite spirit. In each of them burns a spark that I ignited, a spark of curiosity, creativity, love, self-sacrifice. They may be weak, but they are not slaves. They fall and they rise. They create beauty that will outlive centuries. They love so fiercely that they are willing to give their short lives for another. Tell me, Hermes, which of you eternal and self-satisfied gods is capable of such a thing?" Hermes frowned. My answer was not what he had expected. "This is all philosophy, Prometheus. Reality is this pain and this rock. You can put an end to it. Be reasonable." "Reason is a word for cowards," I cut in. "Relay my answer to your master. Tell him that I know the name he seeks, and tell him that he will never hear it from me. Let him search for it in his dreams, in the eyes of his wives and lovers. Let his throne become for him not a symbol of power, but a bed of nails. And tell him one more thing, from me personally. Tell him that the greatest threat to his power will come not from his enemies, but from his own blood. It will be born from an act he commits, blinded by his pride and lust. And when that happens, he will come to me himself, not with messengers, but in person, and he will beg, but it will be too late." Hermes's face turned pale. I had not just refused, I had struck back, pouring a new dose of poison into the already fear-poisoned mind of Zeus. The messenger of the gods understood that his mission had failed. He turned silently and disappeared, leaving behind only the smell of ozone and a ringing silence. I knew what would follow, and I was not mistaken. Soon the sky turned black, not with ordinary clouds, but with the concentrated wrath of Zeus. A hurricane wind slammed into my rock, trying to rip me off along with my chains. Lightning bolts, one after another, struck the stone beside me, showering me with red-hot fragments. The thunder was not just a sound. It was a physical blow that shook my bones. Zeus was venting his rage on me, his powerlessness. He could torment my flesh, but he could not reach my mind, my secret. And the stronger the storm, the more clearly I understood that I was winning. His only answer was crude, blind force, which only proved my point. This divine tantrum did not go unnoticed. On Olympus, the gods watched in horror as the storm raged at the edge of the world. They saw that it was not just a natural phenomenon, but the wrath of their ruler. And this sowed discord among their ranks. Some, like Ares or Hephaestus, rallied even more strongly around Zeus, admiring his power. Others, wiser, began to doubt. Hera, his wife, watched it all with a cold, hidden smile. Any humiliation of Zeus was a small victory for her. Athena, my longtime silent ally, stood with a troubled face. She was loyal to her father, but she saw his tyranny and understood my righteousness. A quiet murmur of doubt began to creep through the halls of Olympus. And below, on earth, People saw this terrible storm in the distant mountains. They did not know its causes, but in their myths, they told of a great battle of the gods. They felt that somewhere up there, their fate was being decided, and their prayers, addressed to me, became even more fervent. They asked not for wealth or power, but for fortitude, for the strength to endure, as their Titan advocate endured. When the storm finally subsided, I was physically broken, but my spirit was harder than the adamantine of my chains. I had won this round. I had proven that will and knowledge can stand against any force. I was left alone, under the silent sky, wounded but undefeated, and I continued my wait, now no longer as a victim, but as a silent guardian of fate, awaiting my hour and my hero. Time on Olympus flowed differently. For the gods, centuries were like seasons. Zeus, exhausted by fruitless attempts to break my will, left me alone for a time, immersing himself in ruling the world and his endless love affairs. But the shadow of the prophecy did not disappear. It poisoned his victories and darkened his feasts. His paranoia led him to an unthinkable step. He decided to descend to the very edge of the cosmos, to the place from which he himself had once escaped, into the gloomy depths of Tartarus. He believed that there, among the defeated Titans, he would find an answer. Perhaps one of my fallen brothers, broken by an eternity of torment, would be more compliant. With the help of Hermes, who could cross any boundary, Zeus penetrated the abyss. The air here was heavy with despair and ancient hatred. He passed Atlas, his eternal enemy, holding the celestial sphere on his shoulders, and Menoetius, struck down for his audacity. Finally, he found the one he was looking for, my father, Iapetus. He was chained to a rock, like me, but his eyes did not burn with the fire of defiance. They held only a dull, endless pain. Iapetus, Zeus's voice boomed, breaking the silence of the abyss. Your son Prometheus persists in his foolishness, but you, who have known the full weight of defeat, must be wiser. Tell me what he knows. Which goddess will bear my doom? My father slowly raised his head. His lips, which had not known speech for thousands of years, parted with difficulty. You come to ask for help from the one you yourself cast into this darkness? He rasped. My son inherited my pride, but your gift, Zeus, is fear. You fear a shadow that you yourself cast. Begone. You will not find the answer here, but in your own lust. Angry and humiliated, Zeus left Tartarus. The defeat in the abyss only intensified his obsession. He began to go through all the goddesses and nymphs in his mind, and his gaze settled on one of the most beautiful and desired, the sea Nereid Thetis. She was as swift as a wave and as beautiful as a pearl. Many gods, including Zeus himself and his brother Poseidon, desired her. Zeus decided that she would be his next wife. He was sure that she, flattered by the attention of the ruler of the universe, could not possibly bear him a threat. He was already preparing to announce his decision when I, on my distant rock, felt that the time had come. This was the very act I had warned of through Hermes. I strained all my will, all my foresight, and sent a mental cry across the universe. A cry directed not at Zeus, but at someone who could hear it, Athena. Stop him, Thetis, do not let him take her. Her son, whoever his father may be, is prophesied to become immeasurably stronger than his parent. Athena, who was near her father at that moment, heard my desperate call. She understood everything. If Zeus took Thetis, a god capable of overthrowing him would be born. It would be a new titanomachy, a new war that would destroy the world. Acting quickly, she intervened. "Father," she said, with the utmost respect she could muster, "your wisdom is limitless. But would it not be an even greater display of your power and justice to arrange the fate of this beautiful Nereid differently? Give her in marriage to a mortal, to the great king Peleus. Their union will be blessed by all the gods, and it will be the greatest celebration on earth, a symbol of the unity of Olympus and the world of men." Zeus, blinded by anticipation and seeing no trick, thought the idea was brilliant. It would be an unprecedented gesture that would strengthen his reputation not only as a tyrant, but also as a generous patron. He agreed. The wedding was set. I, on my rock, allowed myself the first smile in millennia. I had saved my enemy from his own foolishness. But I did not do it for his sake. I did it for the sake of the world. And I knew that at this wedding, to which all would be invited except for Eris, the goddess of discord, an apple would be thrown that would ultimately lead to the Trojan War. And in that war, heroes would win fame, including the one I had seen in my vision. I was not just waiting. I had begun to weave the threads of fate. While the gods wove intrigues on Olympus, on earth, in the forests of Thessaly, a young man was growing up who was destined to change everything. His name was Heracles. The son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene, he possessed inhuman strength from infancy. But raw power without wisdom is merely a destructive force. Therefore, he was sent to be raised by the wisest of all living beings, the centaur, Chiron. Chiron was immortal, but he was not a god. He was the son of the Titan Cronus and the Oceanid Philyra, which made him my distant relative. Unlike his wild kinsman, he was an expert in medicine, music, astronomy, and the art of war. In his cave on Mount Pelion, he taught the greatest heroes of Greece. And it was to him that I, using rare moments of clear consciousness, was able to convey a part of my story. I could not speak to him directly. But when Chiron looked at the stars, he saw not just constellations, but a map of my suffering. When he listened to the music of the wind in the gorges, he heard the echoes of my groans. He understood my story not with his mind, but with his heart, and he passed it on to his best student, Heracles. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Chiron told the young man the legend of Prometheus. He did not speak of prophecies and divine intrigues. He told of a Titan who loved humanity so much that he went against the will of the gods themselves. He described my torture, the eternal eagle, and the indomitable spirit. "Then why does no one free him?" asked the young Heracles, his fists clenched in anger. "Because it would mean challenging Zeus himself," Chiron replied, gazing into the fire. "For that, a hero is needed whose strength is equal to his compassion, whose courage knows no bounds, and whose heart aches for injustice as much as the Titan's liver aches from the eagle's beak." This story took root in Heracles' soul. It became his inner compass. He performed his famous 12 labors not only because King Eurystheus commanded him. He did it to cleanse the world of darkness, to prove to the gods and to himself that he was worthy. And deep down, he knew that his path, his series of trials, would one day lead him to the edge of the world, to a lonely, snow-capped peak. My foresight became ever clearer. I saw him fighting the Nemean lion, killing the Lenaean hydra, cleaning the Augean stables. Each of his labors was a step toward me. He did not know it yet, but his destiny was inextricably linked with mine. I was the beginning of his journey, the legend that inspired him. and I was to be its culmination, the last unofficial labor that would define his greatness. And Chiron, my silent ally, waited. He knew that one day Heracles would accidentally wound him with a poisoned arrow, and he, an immortal, would be doomed to eternal torment from the Hydra's poison, for which there was no cure. And then he would make a deal with Zeus. He would renounce his immortality and descend to Hades if Zeus would allow Heracles to free me. The circle was closing. The fates of the centaur, the hero, and the titan were being woven into one tight knot. The day I had seen in my vision thousands of years ago had arrived. I felt its approach long before I saw his figure on the mountainside. The air had changed. It was filled not only with cold and despair, but also with resolve. Heracles ascended slowly but surely. He was no longer a youth, but a mature warrior, his face reflecting all his battles and losses. Finally, he reached the summit and stopped before me. We looked at each other in silence for a long time. He saw before him not a mythical titan, but a broken, wounded being, in whose eyes, however, an unquenchable fire burned. I, in turn, saw before me not just the son of my enemy, but the embodiment of all that was best in gods and men: strength, compassion, will. At that moment, a black dot appeared on the horizon. My daily tormentor was flying to its bloody feast. "Step aside, hero," I rasped. "This is not your fight." "Any fight for justice is mine, Titan," he replied, not taking his eyes off me, his hand resting on his bow. But before he could draw the string, the sky was split by a thunderclap, and Zeus materialized beside us. He appeared not as an eagle or a bull, but in his true, dazzling form. He had come not to give battle, but to prevent one. "Heracles, lower your bow." His voice was that of a sovereign. "You will not dare raise a hand against my servant who carries out my sentence." Then he turned to me. "Prometheus, it is time to end this senseless feud. Your hero is here. You have won. Now tell me what I want to know. Name the name, and I will allow him to break your chains." This was the moment of truth. My entire eternity of suffering was reduced to this choice. Before me stood my enemy, offering a deal, and my savior, ready to act. I slowly shifted my gaze from Zeus to Heracles, and then looked up at the sky. "The name you seek, Zeus, no longer matters. You yourself averted the threat when you listened to your daughter and gave Thetis to a mortal. The prophecy concerned her son. You are saved, not by your wisdom, but by my intervention." Shock, followed by understanding, and then fury at the realization of being manipulated, flashed across Zeus's face. But the fury was replaced by relief. The burden that had weighed on him for millennia was gone. "But that is not all," I continued, addressing both of them now. "My release will not be payment for your peace of mind, Zeus. It will be a sign of a new order, an order in which the gods do not just rule, but serve the balance. And you, Heracles, will free me not as your father's servant, but as a free hero, acting on the will of your heart. You will break these chains, and then, if your father allows, you will take your place on Olympus, not as his son, but as a representative of the best part of humanity. The bridge between our worlds must be built." Zeus was silent. He had lost, but in his defeat, he had gained what he had so long sought: security. He looked at his son, in whom he now saw not only strength, but also a wisdom that surpassed his own. He looked at me, his eternal adversary, and for the first time saw not an enemy, but an equal. "So be it, Titan," he finally said. and there was no anger in his voice, only weariness. He nodded to Heracles and disappeared in a flash of lightning. Heracles approached me. He did not smash the chains with his club. He took them in his hands and with inhuman effort tore apart the adamantine links that no one in the universe could break. For the first time in countless eons, I stood on my own feet. I was free. The pain was gone. I took a deep breath, and the frosty air seemed sweeter than nectar. My long night was over. I looked at Heracles and nodded. We both knew this was not the end of the story, but its true beginning. My return to Olympus was not triumphant. I entered the throne room not as a vanquished foe begging for forgiveness, nor as a victor demanding honors. I entered as one who had survived eternity, and this was felt in every step I took, in every glance. The gods parted before me. On their faces, I read a mixture of fear, curiosity, and a hidden respect. They saw not just a titan, but a living embodiment of the consequences of Zeus's wrath, a symbol that even their immortal world could be shattered by the will of one defiant spirit. Zeus sat on his throne, and our first exchange of looks in millennia was heavier than any chains. He no longer saw a rebel in me, and I no longer saw a tyrant in him. We were two sides of the same coin, two forces whose clash had changed the cosmos. My presence here was not a sign of his mercy, but a condition of a new, fragile stability. Beside the throne, for the first time in history, stood a mortal hero, Heracles. He was not invited to a feast. He was offered a place among the gods, and his presence was as much a violation of the old order as mine was. He was the bridge I had spoken of, living proof that the worlds of gods and men were henceforth inextricably linked. But Olympus is no place for simple solutions. My release and Heracles' elevation could not fail to have consequences. The first to voice her displeasure was Hera. Her hatred for Zeus's illegitimate children was legendary, and to see Heracles, her eternal enemy, not just forgiven, but raised to the status of a deity, was an unbearable insult to her. My lord, my husband. Her voice was as sweet as poisoned honey. Your generosity knows no bounds. You have forgiven a traitor who nearly destroyed the world and elevated a bastard whose existence is a perpetual shame to your marriage. What new wonder will you show us next? Perhaps you will open the gates of Tartarus and invite Cronus to the feast? Zeus shot her an incinerating glare, but remained silent. He was bound by his word, given on the summit of the Caucasus, but Hera's words fell on fertile ground. Ares, the god of war, who had always despised Heracles for his nobility, snorted loudly in agreement. Other gods, whose power was based on the old order, on the insurmountable chasm between gods and mortals, also began to grumble. They feared that my precedent and Heracles' ascension would open Pandora's box a second time. What if other mortal heroes demanded a place on Olympus? What if the gods ceased to be exceptional? I understood their fears, and I knew that my place here was not at the banquet table. Zeus, I said, and all eyes turned to me. I ask for neither power nor honors. My place is no longer here, among you. I have returned to fulfill the last part of our unspoken agreement. I must heal the wounds that we have inflicted upon the world. I propose something unthinkable. I, a Titan, decided to become a teacher, not only for humans, but for the gods as well. I wanted to teach them responsibility. I proposed creating a new code of laws that would regulate the relationship between Olympus and the earth. The gods could no longer interfere in the fates of mortals, for entertainment, or on a whim. Every divine intervention would have to have a purpose, to maintain balance, not to satisfy an ego. Heracles, as a demigod, demi-human, was to be the guarantor of this treaty, its first high priest on earth. My proposal caused a storm. Some, like Athena and Hephaestus, saw wisdom in it. They understood that the old world, based on fear and caprice, had outlived itself. But others, led by Hera and Ares, considered it an unprecedented audacity. I, a former prisoner, dared to dictate to them, the eternal gods, how to behave. It was at that moment that what I had expected, but was not fully prepared for, happened. From the crowd of gods emerged Chiron, my old friend, the centaur. He was here, on Olympus, summoned by Zeus to discuss his fate. His body was writhing in pain from Heracles' poisoned arrow. The venom of the Lernaean hydra caused the immortal eternal agony. "Lord Zeus," the centaur said, struggling against the pain, "Gods, I have heard your arguments. You speak of laws and balance, but you have forgotten the price paid for the mistakes of gods and heroes. I am living proof of that. I suffer from a poison born of a feat you celebrate. My immortality has become my curse." He turned to me. "Prometheus, you know the price of suffering. You know what an eternity of pain is. I offer a deal. I want to die, but death is closed to me. I will give up my immortality if someone will accept it. I am ready to take your place in Tartarus, in the abyss, if that is what it takes to find peace." His words hung in a deafening silence. It was a sacrifice unheard of in this world of egoists, an immortal, willing to renounce his gift to be free from pain. And then I understood what my final gift to the world had to be. "Chiron," I said, "your immortality will not be wasted. You will not descend into Tartarus. You will take your place in the sky. You will become a constellation, an eternal reminder of wisdom, self-sacrifice, and the fact that even immortals can suffer. People will look to you and learn from the stars, as you once taught them on earth." Then I turned to Zeus, "And I will accept his suffering, not his immortality, that I will give to the heavens. I will take his pain. The Hydra's poison will flow in my veins. This will be my price for freedom and my final lesson. A lesson that all freedom has a price, and that true strength is not in avoiding pain, but in taking it upon oneself for the sake of others." Heracles stepped forward, his face distorted with despair. "No, I will not allow it. It is my fault. I should suffer." "Your suffering, hero," I stopped him, "is your life, your labors, and your future service. This world needs you alive and strong. My mission is almost complete. Allow me to finish it with dignity." I approached Chiron and laid my hands on him. In that instant, an unbearable, burning pain shot through my entire body. It was the Hydra's poison, amplified 1,000-fold by my titanic essence. I staggered, but stood firm. Chiron's face brightened, his body stopped convulsing, and he began to slowly dissolve, turning into luminous dust that streamed upward toward the night sky. And I remained standing, the bearer of a new, voluntary torture. My act disarmed all my opponents. Even Hera and Ares were silent, stunned by this act of self-sacrifice. In that moment, I ceased to be an enemy or a competitor to them. I became something else, something they could not understand, but could not help but respect. The fragile equilibrium on Olympus was achieved not by force or laws, but by sacrifice. Zeus nodded silently, accepting my terms. The new order was established. I left Olympus. My place was no longer there. I settled on Earth among the humans. but not as a god or a king. I became a wanderer, a teacher, a healer. The poison in my veins caused me constant pain, but this pain was different from that on the Caucasus. That had been a senseless torture. This was a meaningful choice, an eternal reminder of the price of freedom. It brought me closer to people, to their own sufferings. I taught them not only crafts and sciences, but also what I had learned over an eternity in chains. I taught them philosophy. I taught them that the true fire I brought them burns not in the hearth, but in the soul. It is the fire of curiosity, compassion, the pursuit of justice. I explained to them that the gods were not omnipotent despots, but merely powerful forces of nature, with their own passions, fears, and mistakes. That one should pray not out of fear, but out of respect for the harmony of the universe, and that a person's main responsibility is not to the gods, but to other people and to the world they live in. I founded the first schools, where children learned not only writing and arithmetic, but also critical thinking. I taught them to ask questions, to doubt authorities, to seek truth for themselves. I became an enemy of dogma and blind faith. Some priests, whose power was built on fear of the gods, came to hate me, calling me a blasphemer and a tempter. They tried to turn the people against me, but their efforts were in vain. The people, who remembered the legend of my sacrifice, saw me not as an enemy of the gods, but as their greatest friend. Heracles, in turn, became who he was destined to be. He did not remain on Olympus, enjoying immortality. He returned to Earth and founded the first Olympic Games, not just contests of strength, but a celebration of peace, during which all wars were to cease. He taught people that the body was as important as the spirit, and that noble competition was better than a bloody battle. He became the living bridge between worlds, fulfilling his mission. Sometimes our paths crossed. We would meet in the shade of olive groves and talk for hours. He would tell me of his deeds, of the difficulties in governing people, of his doubts. I would share with him my wisdom, my pain, and my hopes. We were a strange pair, a titan suffering from a hero's poison, and a hero who owed his fame and wisdom to that titan. Years passed. Humanity changed. It built great cities, created immortal works of art, discovered the laws of nature. It made terrible mistakes, waged bloody wars, became mired in vice. But it always rose again. The fire in their souls did not die out. One day, I felt that my time on Earth was coming to an end. The Hydra's poison that I carried within me was slowly but surely destroying even my titanic essence. My pain became almost unbearable, but with it came a sense of completion. I had done all that I could. I climbed a high mountain from which the whole world was visible, from the shining polis of Greece to the misty shores of the ocean. I looked upon the work of my hands, upon these noisy, bustling, beautiful, and terrible creations. They no longer needed me. They had learned to walk on their own. My gift had been absorbed. I closed my eyes and, for the last time, looked back on my life. I regretted nothing. Not my challenge to Zeus, not the millennia of torture, not the voluntarily accepted pain. This was my path, and I had walked it to the end. At that moment, a figure appeared silently beside me. It was Athena. She looked the same as she had on the day she came to my workshop to breathe life into my clay statuettes. "Your work is finished, Prometheus," she said softly. "Is it?" I chuckled. "Look at them. They still fight, hate, fear. Perhaps I made a mistake. You gave them a choice, she answered, and that is the greatest and most terrible gift of all. You could not create a paradise for them, because a paradise without choice is a cage. You gave them fire, and it is for them to decide how to use it. Some warm themselves by it, others burn down their homes. But they live, they feel, they seek, and that is thanks to you. She held out her hand to me. It is time. Your place is no longer here, nor on Olympus. There is a place for those who have completed their journey, a place of peace. I took her hand. The pain that had tormented me for so long began to recede, replaced by a sense of deep, all-encompassing peace. My body began to glow, just as Chiron's body once had, but my light did not stream toward the stars. It began to fade, dissolving into the very air, into the light of the sun, into the rustling of the leaves. I was not dying. I was becoming a part of the world I had loved so much. My spirit, my fire, dissolved into the souls of all living beings, becoming part of their eternal striving for the light. My last gaze was directed at humanity, at these strange, illogical, fragile, yet indestructible children of clay and fire. My children. And I departed with the thought that, despite all the pain and all the suffering, it was worth it.